Okay, hi guys.
Hello.
How's everybody doing?
Good.
Everybody good? Excellent.
Chugging along.
Good. Okay. Good. So, welcome to Poetry Sunday. Today we're doing, oh my God, what just the best, John Donne.
I love him.
Yes. Yes. Okay, so let's yeah, he actually Tova, he's not in that book, but I'm going to have his text on screen for y'all. So let's actually start with my favorite mantra. So in a moment we'll fill up with air, take a nice long deep breath, and then as we let it out on the syllable just have the feeling of being released from you 360 degrees in all directions, going out into boundless space. And it's good to take the kind of the biggest gulp of air we can, so we can stay with the syllable as long as we can, not because we're in a breath holding contest or something, but because when you not because we're timing it, oh, how long can I hold it, but in fact, in a sense, the opposite, to get lost in it, to get lost in the timelessness of awe, and as it's going out in all directions, in the spacelessness of it. Okay, which of course then approximates the timelessness, the spacelessness of beingness, which is what we are and which is what this stuff's all about. So let me mute you all for the moment. And okay, so let's take a really slow, really deep breath. Of course, maybe your breath is longer than mine or shorter than mine. Doesn't matter. The idea is just to let yourself get lost in it. So let's do two more of those. Okay. So welcome to the people who just joined us. Brother Bob, other Brother Bob. So good to see you. Okay, so John Donne. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. So first of all, it's spelled Donne, but it's not pronounced Don, it's pronounced Dunn. In fact, kind of the turning point in John Donne's life, he came from a family that was well off and well connected in court. He was a contemporary of Shakespeare's. Okay, so he lived in the I forget his exact dates, but he lived in the end of the 16th, beginning of the 17th century, contemporary of Shakespeare's. As a young man, in fact, he loved going to the theater. We can assume he went to Shakespeare's plays, probably saw Shakespeare acting. But he was from a Catholic family. And at the time in England, that was a problem. It was illegal. They made they had the culturally disastrous phenomenon of getting religion mixed up with politics, so which never ends well. and in this case, you may recall from your history that going back a generation, when Henry VIII had a wife problem, he needed to get a wife that would give him a male heir, and he ran through several wives, and when the Pope would not give him an annulment from his first wife, he said, okay, I'm going to take my marbles and go home. I'll make my own church, and I'll grant myself the annulment. So that's how the Church of England was started. So after being the defender of the faith, right, after Henry VIII literally had been burning Protestants at the stake, now that he needed to solve his problem, he became the head of your basic English Protestant church, the Anglican Church, the Church of England. So now everything got turned around. Now, to be a loyal subject of the throne, you had to be a Protestant, an Anglican Church of England, and being now all the Catholics were on the outs. So Donne grew up in this Catholic family. Actually, a brother of his got imprisoned for being a Catholic and died as a result. Donne wound up connected with some high-powered people at court, had a promising career as a young man. As a young gentleman, he went on some expeditions with some of the military adventures into various parts of Europe, learned languages, had everything going for him, was working for some well-connected people, and then came the big turning point of his life, which is met and fell in love with this charming 17-year-old girl, Anne Moore, who he knew that politically her father would never go along with the marriage, married her secretly. And when the father eventually they told the father was furious. And Donne, I was mentioning his name's pronounced Donne, and he wrote a letter to Anne, and he summed up their situation when he signed the letter: John Donne, Anne Donne, undone. Okay, so he was undone by this disastrous marriage. They had, over the course of, I think, 16 years of marriage, they had 12 kids. She was constantly pregnant, lost a few in childbirth, lost a few later in childhood. And she eventually, after 12 years of marriage, she died after giving birth to yet another stillborn child. And this whole time they were, finding patrons, doing hack work, writing pamphlets and things for rich patrons in order to support his growing family. And by now Elizabeth was dead. James I was on the throne. Donne caught the king's eye. The king said, "This guy's a talented writer. I want him to preach. I got to go listen to sermons every Sunday. I want him to preach my sermons." So he started putting the screws on Donne. He said, "I want you to take holy orders. I want you to become an Anglican, by the way, and I want you to take holy orders and become the dean of St. Paul's. You know, St. Paul's Cathedral. If you've ever, this was the old St. Paul's Cathedral, which burned down in the Great Fire of London." And Donne resisted. Finally, he couldn't resist the king. Took holy orders and preached these brilliant sermons, some of which you know some lines from them. The one that you've heard quoted in a million, graduation speeches and things. "No man is an island." Right? You've heard that. "No man is an island entire unto itself, but is a part of the continent," blah, blah, blah. The idea of, it was, and this was a funeral for sermon for someone or other, and the climax of that one is, "Therefore send not to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee." Right? We've all heard that. In fact, we've all heard that so many times that it's hard to hear it fresh. Right? But if you listen to that fresh, man, that's what we're talking about all the time. Right? We're not isolated little selves. We're all part of this bigger thing of which everyone and everything is a part. We're not, no man is an island. Everyone is part of the continent. Okay? Now, you couldn't make a living those days as publishing poetry. That category of that was not an economic activity that existed. But some of his poetry was passed around in manuscript form among his friends, and it became quite popular. And then after he died, it went away. It was completely forgotten. He went from being just really esteemed to just completely forgotten. Had a little bit of a revival in the 19th century. And then in the 20th century, the 1920s, T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, some of those guys you may be familiar with, kind of rediscovered Donne. And they realized, this guy's it. This is as good as it gets. Okay? So, his poetry, he's kind of got mainly three kinds of poetry, which may or may not show his chronological development. As a young man, he's got a bunch of poems that are about women and sex and women being fickle, and a lot of them are a genre called the seduction song. Right, the seduction song. It's a poem written to get laid, and some of them are quite effective, as you'll see. Some of them, you listen to this poem, you go, "Yeah, I'd go there. I'd listen to this guy." I actually confess, in my youth once, I got lucky with a John Donne poem. So I can testify it does work, or at least it can work. Those poems, people usually assume, but we don't really know for sure because it wasn't published till years after he died. But usually we associate those poems with his early life, with his youth. Then the poems of more mature love, which we're going to read one of those in a moment here. More mature love, deeper love, not just this kind of superficial, not just, concerned with sex so much, are usually associated with the middle years when he was married to Anne. And then he has poetry that is, the Holy Sonnets are a big series that he wrote that are usually, we assume he wrote in his later years when he was a preacher. Okay? So that's the the quick intro to the life and works of John Donne. Let's go to one of my very favorite poems of Donne's or anyone else. Okay, are you all seeing this? A valediction forbidding mourning? By the way, you can unmute yourselves so you can comment here. Are you all seeing that on your screen?
Yes.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So he wrote a number of these valedictions. The word valediction, of course, means a farewell. It's a farewell. In this case, apparently, he was once again going overseas on a diplomatic mission with some, as like an attaché to some nobleman or other. And so he wrote this presumably to his wife. So notice it's mourning with a U, right? In other words, grieving. Don't grieve. So from the title, we get the theme. Okay, goodbye, I have to go away, but don't grieve. Don't grieve. It's okay that I'm leaving. Now, it was pretty much not okay to be, travel was dangerous and unreliable in those days. All kinds of hazards and you would probably be gone for months or more. So he's got to pull out his best poetic powers here to make the case. Oh, I forgot to mention, he was trained. He attended what was the equivalent of law school, and we often get the feeling in his poems that his training as a lawyer is coming to play. It's almost as if he's arguing a case, right? Arguing a case. And in fact, some of the later literary critics criticize him for this. He said he's appealing to the young ladies' minds. You can't talk to a lady's mind. You have to talk to the lady's heart, right? But he knew better. So I'll read this once and then we'll break it down. A valediction forbidding mourning. As virtuous men pass mildly away and whisper to their souls to go, while some of their sad friends do say, the breath goes now, and some say, no. So let us melt and make no noise. No tear floods nor sigh tempests move. 'Twere profanation of our joys to tell the laity our love. Moving of the earth brings harms and fears. Men reckon what it did and meant, but trepidation of the spheres, though greater far, is innocent. Dull sublunary lovers' love, whose soul is sense, cannot admit absence, because it doth remove those things which elemented it. But we, by a love so much refined that ourselves but we, by a love so much refined that ourselves know not what it is, interassured of the mind, care less eyes, lips, and hands to miss. Our two souls, therefore, which are one, though I must go, endure not yet a breach, but an expansion, like gold to airy thinness beat. If they be two, they are two so as stiff twin compasses are two. Thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show to move, but doth, if the other do. And though it in the centre sit, Yet when the other far doth roam, it leans and hearkens after it, and grows erect as that comes home. Such wilt thou be to me, who must, like the other foot, obliquely run. Thy firmness makes my circle just, and makes me end where I begun.
Mhm.
Okay?
Yeah, good.
Okay. Good. Yes. It is good. It is very good. So let's unpack this thing and see just how good it is and why, how how it how it gets so good. Okay. So the first line, as virtuous men pass mildly away. Something's being described there, which might be easy to miss. What's going? Do you see what he's alluding to there? See what he's talking about?
Righteous man.
Passing away. He's talking about people dying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's talking about dying, and he's talking about the belief that good people, virtuous people, have easy deaths.
Mhm.
They pass
Yeah.
away mildly.
Mhm.
They pass away. You know, their soul is in a state of peace. They just right. Whereas people who are not at peace, who their sins are weighing upon them, or they don't have things settled, they have difficult deaths. Is the idea here? So, what an interesting thing to start with. He's starting with something. He's talking about, saying goodbye to his lover or his wife, but he starts by talking about people on their deathbed.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Right? So how's he going to bring these together? As virtuous men pass mildly away and whisper to their souls to go. That's lovely, right? There we're talking about actually, let me put it together with the next two lines. While some of their sad friends do say, the breath goes now, and some say, no. Right? In other words, for a virtuous person, a good person who's settled, it's very hard to tell what's the exact moment of death.
Mhm.
The implication is the breath just becomes they're breathing in a mild way. It's not it's not all this heaving and upset and turbulence. They're just becoming less, 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 less. It's hard to tell at what point is it gone. Now, does that remind you of anything? Of
Well,
something you're doing every day?
going to sleep.
Well, in sleep, the respiration settles down. There's another thing that hopefully you're doing every day where respiration settles down. It's called meditation.
Meditation.
Hello, it's called meditation, right? Where have you ever noticed you're sitting there in meditation? Sometimes you go, God, have I breathed in the last 10 minutes? Right? Usually we don't even much think that because we're just so because the mind is settling, body and mind are settling together, and it's just so natural. It just kind of sneaks up on us. But this research has been done over the last 40, almost 50 years now, documenting this. This is what happens when we meditate. It's the wakeful hypometabolic state, that hypometabolic part. Everything settles down. All the metabolic fires settle down, and the fuel for those fires is our oxygen. So our breath settles down. Hard to tell at what point we stop breathing. Sometimes you experience it, by the way, the other way in meditation, which is you're in the middle of meditation. You don't realize your breath has been settling down, and suddenly you find yourself taking a deep breath. a sudden deep breath, because it's like the body has kind of wandered into such such a deep level of minimized respiration that it feels it needs to, well, I better get some oxygen here. Okay, so this whole first stanza hangs on the word as. So we know this whole thing is an extended simile. This whole thing is something else is going to be compared to it. And we get that in the next, with the first word, the next stanza. So. Right? So as blah, 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 so blah, 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 blah. So let us melt. Right? Oh, it's so beautiful. This is the proper way for us to part. Not with all this turbulent heaving and sighing, but like a virtuous man dying, just melting away from each other. Oh, that's lovely. So let us melt and make no noise. No tear floods nor sigh tempests move. Right? So here we have the typical poetic device of hyperbole. Poets all over the place in the Elizabethan age were, I'm shedding a flood of my tears for you are a great flood. My sighing for you till it raises a tempest. So what does Donne do? He takes the cliche, what was by then a cliche, and turns it around. Turns it to the negative. No tear floods, nor sigh tempests move. By the way, similar thing you may want to check out. Again, contemporaneous with Donne, you have Shakespeare writing his sonnets and starting to realize that some of this stuff is becoming cliches. So he's got this one sonnet where he basically goes through the whole list of cliches for love poetry and turns them all around. And it starts, and this is how you can find it. You can find all this stuff online. The opening line, which is, "My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun." right. Because everyone's trying to think, oh, your eyes are like the sun. Your lips are like coral. So he's going, my mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red, et cetera, et cetera. So check that out. The same kind of thing. So back to this. So let us melt and make no noise, no tear floods, nor sigh tempests move. 'Twere profanation of our joys to tell the laity our love. So look at the movement here, right? He's established, okay, don't make a bunch of noise about our grieving here, about our parting. And then he advances that. To do that would be to profane our joys. Right? So there's something by implication. If we're saying, oh, we don't want to profane our love, we don't want to profane our joy, the implication is, well, our joy is sacred. Sacred. Twere means it were, which means it would be. These days we would say it would be profanation of our joys to tell the laity our love. Ah, interesting. What is laity?
Well, he was a preacher.
Yeah, laity is those who are not the clergy, right? The laity are the lay people, right? So but look how much he does by implication. Right? By saying it would profane our love, that implies our love is sacred. And right, it would profane our joys if we made all this noise that would tip off the mere laity. So if the other people, right, the common folk are the laity, what does that say about Donne and his love? What are they? they're the clergy. They're like the priests. They're the
Joke.
priest and the priestess of the religion of love. It's all implication. You got to be wide. You have to drink your coffee before you read this stuff, which I have done. Okay, so you see this. It's this wonderful hyperbole where our love is so special. It's sacred. It's on the level of the divine. We're not just a man and a woman who are living together and sleeping together and all that. We're doing that. We're high priests in this love religion, which is too sacred to let other people know about it by making all this noise. All right. Moving of the earth brings harms and fears. Okay, what's he talking about there? By the way, you all can unmute yourselves if you want to dive into the conversation here. Moving of the earth.
Earthquake?
Earthquakes, yeah. Moving of the earth, right? Earthquakes brings two things, harms and fears. Right? By the way, I forget, I think maybe the great earthquake in Lisbon may have happened around this time, which was just a huge event. Basically this whole just major European capital was destroyed by an earthquake. So moving the earthquake brings harms, right? It does damage, and fears. Right? In other words, not just the actual physical damage, but then the anxiety it creates in people. The anticipation of possible more damage, the aftershocks and so forth. And there's of course psychological truth here. There's the pain of an unpleasant event, maybe leaving your spouse or lover, but then there's the aftershocks, the anxiety. Oh, but what about this? What about that? Right? The harms and fears. Men reckon what it did and meant. Right? Reckon, they calculate what it did. Right? They go around, they calculate the damage. These days we still do that, but in those days they also calculated what did it mean, right? These catastrophes were generally interpreted as being, some kind of visitation of divine wrath or something. What's God trying to tell us here? What's the meaning of this? So, moving of the earth brings harms and fears. Men reckon what it did and meant. But trepidation of the spheres, though greater far, is innocent. All right. Now here, this bit, you'll never get this one just by parsing it out. We need a little historical background. This requires a long footnote. Okay. The traditional view of the universe, right? Before the traditional view was the geocentric universe, right? The view, what seems intuitively obvious until you get some pretty sophisticated astronomical measurements, it seems pretty obvious that here the Earth is the center of the universe. Everything is revolving around us, right? And in fact, you can find all these pictures and diagrams from centuries before we shifted from this geocentric view to the heliocentric view, where it was understood that at least, in our solar system, everything, including the Earth, is revolving around the sun. Can you, by the way, just think for a moment about the psychological shock of basically, for all of human history, the assumption that we are the center of the whole thing. And then to be told, no, wait, we're not. We're this rock off to the side, one of many rocks revolving around the sun. Can you imagine the resistance to that? I mean, it's not surprising that the church persecuted Galileo and forced him to recant, because it's not just, a little scientific squabble. It's really just a debate about your whole basic worldview in the deep sense. We're not at the center of things.
Duh.
It ain't all about us. Okay, so they got all these models. They had things worked out where the view was that the Earth was at the center, and then surrounding the Earth we had the Earth and Moon and the Sun and Moon and planets, and each one was seen as being embedded in an invisible crystalline sphere. Okay, and they had these models, and actually, if you look up the word astrolabe, 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 that would be like a physical three-dimensional model of this geocentric universe, and with all the concentric spheres, like the rings of an onion. And it was worked out how this ring, this sphere would move this way at this speed, and this one would move this way at this speed. And that is how they explained all the apparent movements of the sun and moon and planets. And then the outermost sphere was this sphere, what was called I think the primum mobile, something like that. It was the sphere of the fixed stars. In other words, the non-planets. The word planet, by the way, is Greek for wanderer, because the planets wander. They change their positions relative to the stars, whereas the stars relative to each other always stay the same. So they were thought as being embedded in the outermost of these concentric crystalline spheres. So this was all worked out, and it all worked fine, except for one thing, which is that every once in a while, as you know, certain planets go retrograde. Right? That's become very trendy when people these days, right? When their emails get lost and they can't get anyone to answer their phone calls or something, they say, "Oh, Mercury must be in retrograde." Right? Because Mercury is supposedly the planet of communications. And so what retrograde action is that because the Earth, in actuality, the Earth is catching up in its orbit to Mercury or certain other planets. It looks, relative to the Earth, it looks like that planet is going backwards for a while. Right? And that's called retrograde movement. So the way this was explained in the old geocentric model, right, with the astrolabe, was, once in a while, one of these spheres will just go into like reverse gear, and that was called trepidation of the spheres. Okay, so this whole thing's been a long footnote to explain these four words, trepidation of the spheres. So it means this supposed backward movement of a planet. All right? So let's put this together, right? Moving the Earth, right? The earthquake, when the Earth moves, it creates all this fear, all this harm. Everyone's running around trying to figure out the damage, calculate the damage and the divine meaning of it. But trepidation of the spheres, right? That movement is much bigger. It's on a much grander scale than just some movement taking place in the Earth, but it's innocent. It doesn't do any damage. All right? What does that have to do with Donne and the poet and his lover. You see what he's identifying? He's already identified earlier, right? They're the priests. The everyone else is the laity, right? We're not going to participate in the floods of tears or the tempest. So he's steadily moving him and his wife or lover to a higher level above the physical elements. Right? So we're going above the level of the earth. If we were just physical, then our separation would be like an earthquake, damaging. But we're out here in the celestial spheres. We are celestial. So even though our movement is much greater, much grander, it doesn't do any damage. And now he picks up this theme in the next stanza. Dull sublunary lovers love. This word, you will never probably see this word again in your life except in this poem. Sublunary. You see what it means?
Where is it? Oh,
Sublunary.
Yeah.
Under the moon.
Mm-hmm.
I love that word. I love that word. And what it means, it's a fancy way of saying earthbound, terrestrial, because in that geocentric model, the moon was on the sphere that was closest to the earth, right? So anything under the moon is earthbound. It's just crawling here on this rock. So now what he's doing is he's dissing, other people's love. They're all those people who are just, Minska Pinska, right? They're just dull sublunary lovers love, earthly love whose soul is sense, right? Its essence is just the five senses. It doesn't go any deeper than the five senses. In other words, it's all physical. Dull sublunary lovers love whose soul is sense cannot admit absence because it doth remove those things which elemented it. Right? You see that? That makes sense, right? Right?
Mm-hmm.
If all you got is the physical, then you can't abide with the physical removal.
Being removed.
You've taken away what the thing was all about. But we, right? You and me, baby, we by a love so much refined that ourselves know not what it is. Interassured of the mind, care less eyes, lips, and hands to miss. Right? So you see there the contrast between, this dull sublunary lover's love, right? What does their love consist of? It consists of eyes, lips, hands. But that's not what our...
Dean, what does interassured?
Interassured of the mind.
Could you comment on interassured?
Interassured, yeah. In other words, we're not upset by the separation by our physical separation because our minds we're solid on a higher, more refined level. See that first line of the stanza. Our love is much more refined.
Oh.
Right? It's on the level. It's on the level of the mind, not the body. So I can be hundreds of miles. I can be across the water on the continent while you're back here in England. Our bodies are separate, but our minds are still together.
How about the word inter? Does that mean it's sort of a mind that is the result of both their minds being together?
You know what? Hold that thought. We'll get to. Well, he's not quite saying that yet, but he's going to in a couple of minutes here. Okay. He hasn't. He all he's saying at this point is that our sureness about each other on the mental level makes it okay for us to be separated on the physical level. But even as he's saying the mental, this is maybe my favorite thing in the whole poem. The line before that, We by a love so much refined that ourselves know not what it is. We can't even just say, oh, it's mental. It's something that can't be spoken. We don't even know, right? It's transcendental.
Mm.
We don't know what it is. All right. Now, Bob, see, you were just one stanza too early. Our two souls, therefore, which are one. There we go. Now he makes that assertion. And of course, that's complete paradox. But this is the Advaita paradox. This is Advaita. This is non-duality,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're two, but we're one. That makes no sense if you're just, on the earthly, physical, sublunary level. You got to be on the transcendental level. You got to be on the non-dual level to see that that two equals one.
Mm-hmm.
Our two souls, therefore, which are one, though I must go, endure not yet a breach, but an expansion. Like gold to airy thinness beat. It's beautiful, isn't it, Judy?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Now, gold is valuable because it's rare and it's beautiful, but also because it's so soft and malleable.
Mhm.
So if you take a more base metal, a less precious metal, and you beat it into thin, it will break. But gold, you can beat it and beat it and beat it until it becomes just this airy, micro thin gold leaf,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
How brilliant to use that as the metaphor. That's what our love is like, because it works. Our love is beautiful, it's precious, it's radiant, it's rare. This kind of love, and it can get beat up. We can get stretched out like silly putty, and it's not going to snap. It just gets bigger. It gets expanded. And by the way, you might notice he actually kind of foreshadowed that way back here. But we by a love so much refined, right? There's the idea there of refining. That's going to blossom in the next stanza is the refining the gold. So how subtle this stuff is, the architecture of it. Like gold to airy thinness beat. Actually, this was in those days the past tense of beat, bet. It's spelled the same, but it was pronounced bet, and it rhymes with yet. By the way, you'll notice that, and this comes up a lot in Donne and also in Shakespeare, you see the word love rhyming with remove. And this happens all the time. Shakespeare's sonnets, Shakespeare's plays, obviously you use the word love a lot, and it's always in rhymes that don't work for us anymore. But in those days, they were both pronounced a little bit more like the way people in the Midwest pronounce "oo," like they say "roof." Santa and the reindeer land on the roof, so they say "dull sublunary lovers love, whose soul is sense cannot admit absence because it doth remove those things which elemented it." So it rhymed in those days. Just while I'm thinking of it quickly, there's this whole movement. You can find some fascinating stuff online. If you look up, and you can find videos about this, look up Shakespeare original pronunciation.
Oh.
And there's this father and son, and put in the word crystal. There's this father and son team. Their last name is Crystal. The father's a linguist, and the son is an actor. And what they've done is this scholarly research to reconstitute how the words were pronounced in Shakespeare's time. Because, the whole clipped, very proper sounding, tight ass Laurence Olivier stuff, which is how we think of Shakespeare, is not how it was spoken at all. It was a very earthy, growling kind of language. And they've been able to through their research, figure out about 85% of how it was pronounced, and they go in as consultants, and they mount whole productions of Shakespeare plays done in original pronunciation.
Hmm.
So you can have fun looking that up on YouTube. Okay. So this stanza, our two souls therefore, which are one, blah, 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 the gold thing. And now he backs off. Okay. Maybe everyone's not ready for full blast non-duality. So he retreats a half a step. If they be two, they are two so as stiff twin compasses are two. And of course, the compasses he's talking about here, not the compass for finding directions, it's the compass for drawing circles.
Oh.
Okay, which in those days it was plural. It's the same way we say scissors, like a pair of scissors. Those days that was a pair of compasses. Now, this was outrageous. What did you compare love to if you were a poet in the 17th century? You compared love to a summer day. You compared love to a babbling brook, but to a pair of compasses, to a some stiff metallic, tool on your desk set. No,
Geometry.
but this is part of what made Donne so innovative. That he, and this is, by the way, why his poetry was, the critics call him and some of the others who wrote like him the metaphysical poets. Not metaphysical the way we usually use the word, but they said there's this metaphysical yoking together of completely unlike things. But he makes it work, as you'll see. And in fact, the whole rest of the poem now, which I have to do kind of quickly, we're running out of time. These last three stanzas, now he takes this metaphor of love as being like the pair of compasses and it's like we can picture Donne sitting at his desk playing with a pair of compasses and figuring out what's everything about the behavior of the compasses and how can I compare that to my love for my wife, our relationship as I go traveling. Right. Like, what's everything I can do with this? This is like, Coltrane playing a solo. What's every direction I can take it in? And in fact, there's a technical term for this. This is what's called a conceit. And it's spelled like our word conceit, meaning like arrogance or egotism, but that's not what it means. It's more like concept. So a conceit means a crazy extended metaphor. Okay. And this, by the way, is the textbook example of a conceit. If you look up conceit in a literary dictionary, they'll always give these three stanzas as the example because this is the most spectacular example of it, pretty much in English poetry. If they, what's they refer to? Our two souls. If they be two, they are two so as stiff twin compasses are two. Thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show to move, but doth if the other do. Aha, so you get the picture. You, my dear, are the foot of the compass that in the center, right? It makes no show to move. In other words, it's standing still. It doesn't look like it doesn't appear to be moving. But actually, when the other one moves, it actually is moving, right? It's moving, but it's standing still. Another paradox. 2 equals 1. Moving equals non-moving. Energy is matter, right? Form is emptiness, right? And though if thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show to move, but doth if the other do. So now we're getting the picture. Okay, she's the one stable, staying home in England. He's the moving foot that has to go to Europe. And though it, right, the fixed foot, and though it in the center sit, yet when the other far doth roam, it leans and hearkens after it, and grows erect as that comes home. Isn't it fantastic? Right. It's so brilliant, right? The farther away I go, the more you lean toward me and hearken after me. I can feel you the farther I go, the more I feel you hearkening after me. Now, also notice the geometry of this, right? Down here on the earth level, on the earth plane, where the piece of paper is, they're separate. Up here at the top, they're one, right? They're two but one. There again, there's the paradox. There's the non-duality, right? Those dull sublunary lovers down here who are earthbound, that, all they have is this, right? If they separate, that's it. It's all over. But we've got this. We've got this connection up here in this celestial realm, up here in where the trepidation of the spheres happens. Okay? So you see how the whole thing, the whole poem, it holds together. It's brilliant. It leans and hearkens after it and grows erect as that comes home. In other words, then when I come home, you're going to be, you become more alert. Oh boy, my honey's coming home. There may be a reference there to stimulated flesh. Honey, when I get home, we're going to have a good party. Right. A lot of such sexual references in the poetry those days. Such wilt thou be to me, who must, like the other foot, obliquely run. So, oblique on a slant, right? So I've got to do that. So I got to do that. You're going to be this. Thy firmness makes my circle just. Right?
Wow.
Now, if you remember being a kid, in grade school, when they first gave you a compass and you were playing with it and you were trying to make a circle and you would just almost have the circle and then the one in the middle would slip and it would mess up your circle. It was always so frustrating. Right? You'd get a ruler, a compass, and a protractor. I don't know if kids still do that, but back in my day they did. Right? So, thy firmness, right? We want to make a good circle here. So what does that require? That you be firm. You be firm, right? And you see how that brings us all the way back to the beginning of the poem, right? You be firm. You don't get overwhelmed. You don't get carried away with crying the floods of tears and heaving the tempests of sighs. You be firm. You just be okay. Thy firmness makes my circle just, right? Just right. And makes me end where I begun. You'll bring me full circle. You bring me back. Right? And there is the sexual element, the sexual implication. There's so many levels of this last thing. That the circle was the Queen Elizabeth's personal symbol and her motto. She had a motto about, I think it was in Latin, I end where I begun, or something like that. So there's that, and there's, right, I'm going to end, right, where my journey began will end. I'll come back home. Then with the sexual implication, where do we begin? We begin in the womb. Where are you going to bring me back to? Your embrace, our sexual embrace. Right? And at the same time, he's established so clearly that, well, there's the sexual element and there's all this other. They did have 12 babies in 16 years, right? But it's, we're out here on the celestial level as well. So it's okay to be physically separated. Okay, this working for you?
Amazing. Yeah.
It is amazing. Thank you, Judy. That's what I wanted to hear. This is all my years of teaching English, I always wanted to teach Donne, and I tried once or twice, but I couldn't get the high school students. I couldn't get them to kind of go there with me. So and it was always very frustrating. So I'm so glad to be able to be doing this today, because it's so amazing. You want to be able to convey that. You want to be able to
Mm.
share that amazingness. I mean, this kind of brilliant stuff. I mean, who else does this? What kind of mind does it take to do that?
Dean,
Yes.
uh, I just wonder, you mentioned that Donne was kind of rediscovered by Eliot and Ezra Pound, and
Yes.
the ending of this poem just, I wonder if there's any of this that filtered into Eliot when he was writing To Arrive Where We Started, and,
Mm.
Little Gidding,
Uh,
this whole idea of wandering and returning where we,
yeah. Yeah. I got to think it must be. Yeah, it must be. Um, I mean, this is beyond my level of scholarship, but you could really, if you sat down with a very thorough knowledge of Donne and a very thorough knowledge of Eliot, I'm sure you would see that that he learned a lot of his tricks there.
right, it might have just percolated in, and, he was
Yeah,
obviously writing his own poetry, but.
yeah, yeah. Um, but it's pretty much considered that there's been, in the history of English literature, there's probably been no more spectacular falling from reputation and then regaining reputation than Donne.
Mm.
There's no other example that I know of where he was held in such esteem, then completely disappeared, and then to be elevated like that again.
More common that someone is obscure in their lifetime and over time they may be
Right.
appreciated, but
Right,
not that
right.
roller coaster that you
Yeah,
described.
yeah. I mean, we saw that with Blake, for example. Yeah.
Well, his notoriety was from from his sermons.
Yeah, he was better
It
known
wasn't
for
even were these
right.
poems even known by
In
everybody?
his lifetime, his poems were passed around in manuscript form among friends. And in fact,
So when they died, there goes his.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
When they died, there goes his claim. There goes the knowledge or the appreciation.
Yeah, well, apparently, someone held on to the manuscripts and had it published at some point. I don't know or recall what the whole publishing history was. But it was very common in those days to pass around like writing sonnets was considered to be one of the pastimes of a gentleman. You would write sonnets, you would falconry and horseback riding and dueling, and this was just all part of the culture of a gentleman. Henry VIII wrote songs, for example. It was just part of the stuff you were expected to know how to do. But Donne was the real thing. And in fact, I believe, if I'm recalling this correctly, there was some first publication of some of his poems, including the probably the early poems, the sexy ones, while he was still the dean of St. Paul's. So that was a little bit embarrassing. You're there preaching to the king about making nice with God, and here's all your, and in fact. Right, I'm remembering this now. It was a criticism. It was pointed out he's using the same legalistic arguments that he used to seduce young women earlier in his life. That later on he uses the same kind of legalistic arguments to seduce God, to tell God, come on, I'm okay. Let me in among the saved. That earlier it was, hey baby, I'm all right, let me into your bed. It was the same skill set, the same clever use of metaphor and hyperbole and paradox and all of that. Yeah, it's really something.
It's,
So it's time for us to go. So we clearly we've got to do some more John Donne. So we'll do more of that next Sunday.
Great.
See you
Sounds good.
then. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks for
Thank you.
playing.
Thank
This
you.
is this
Thank
is
you.
this is
Yeah.
just about as much fun as I can stand.
Okay.
See you guys. Thanks for being.